Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vitvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Nice to see you all this morning. Welcome to you. Welcome also to all of our viewers watching this class online. We'll continue our study of Chapter 9 of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Sri Krishna is giving us this, he calls it Raja Vidya, Raja Guhya, the most royal secret knowledge. And as we've explained before, it's secret because that which is right in front of you goes on being unrecognized. Specifically, the presence of Ishwara, the God of the cosmos, is here now, but unrecognized. That's our topic. Let's begin, as always, with some chanting. And it's important to read the meaning as I'm chanting, and then repeat after me. We'll start with verse 8. Prakritam swamavashtabhya, prakritam swamavashtabhya, visrajami punah punaha, visrajami punah punaha, bhutagramamimam kritsnam, bhutagramamimam kritsnam, avasham prakritirvashat, avasham prakritirvashat, nacha mam tani karmani, nacha mam tani karmani, nibadhanti dhananjaya, nibadhanti dhanan. Udasinavarasinam, udasinavarasinam, asaktam teshu karmasu, asaktam teshu karmasu, mayadhyakshena prakritihi, mayadhyakshena prakritihi, suyate sacharacharam, suyate sacharacharam, hetunanena kaunteya, hetunanena kaunteya, jagad viparivartate, jagad viparivartate, avajananti mam mudha, avajananti mam mudha, manushim tanumashritam, manushim tanumashritam, param bhavamajananto, param bhavamajananto, mama bhuta maheshwaram, mama bhuta maheshwaram, moghasha mogha karmano, moghasha mogha karmano, mogha jnana vichetasaha, mogha jnana vichet. Rakshasim asurim chaiva, rakshasim asurim chaiva, prakritam mohinim shritaha, prakritam mohinim shritaha, mahatmanastu mam partha, mahatmanastu mam partha, daivim prakritamashitaha, daivim prakritamashitaha, bhajantyananya manaso, bhajantyananya manaso, jnatva bhutarim avyayam, jnatva bhutarim avyayam. Very good. Okay. Let's see. Okay, before we pick up the thread here, be good to get the context. And this most secret knowledge taught by Sri Krishna is a twofold knowledge from two different perspectives. And we've talked about those two perspectives at some length, and we've drawn it on the board. We can put the light on. Let's see that now. Yes. These two POV, points of view. One is the empirical, on our far right, the empirical point of view, in Sanskrit, Vyavaharika, and the other is the absolute point of view, Paramartika, and we can look at the source of all from both standpoints. Commonly, we look at the source of all from the empirical standpoint, and we speak of Ishwara, the God who creates, sustains, and destroys the universe, the God who is immanent here now, the God who is manifest in the form of the entire cosmos. That God who we call Ishvara, we also call, using a technical Vedantic terminology, Saguna Brahma, as distinguished from Nirguna Brahma. Nirguna Brahma we'll speak of next, Brahman without qualities, and as I mentioned last week, being the creator, sustainer, destroyer, our qualities are attributes. So this is Saguna Brahman, more commonly simply called Ishvara, God, as opposed to from this absolute standpoint, the Paramartika perspective, we understand that which is transcendent. Immanent means here, now. Transcendent means beyond. Beyond the mind, beyond the senses, beyond comprehension, imagination. That transcendent aspect is what in technical terms we call Nirguna Brahman. Simply Brahman, but Nirguna Brahman, that Brahman which is not creator, sustainer, destroyer, that which is beyond. And then we made a very important observation in our last class. We'll continue with that today. And that is at the bottom, Nirguna Brahman, when accompanied by the creative capacity of Maya, is Ishvara, God as creator, sustainer, destroyer. It's written here as a simple formula, the formula given by my guru, but that formula is very helpful to understand in very simple, concise terms. Relationship between Saguna Brahman and Ishvara, Saguna and Nirguna Brahman, the relationship between Ishvara and Brahman, and it simply is Brahman accompanied by the creative power of Maya is what we call Ishvara or Saguna Brahman, which means, and this will be important in today's class, that Ishvara is the one who possesses Maya. Like a magician possesses the power of conjuring, in the same way Ishvara possesses the power of Maya. We'll see that in today's class. Before we pick up the text, just a couple of good questions here we'll take very quickly. Back in chapter 8, we referred to karma as a force of creation, a creative force which causes the universe to go from an unmanifest condition to a manifest condition. And then in our prior class, we referred to Maya as a creative capacity. So on the surface, it looks like karma is a creative capacity, Maya are the creative capacity. So are they the same thing? They're related, but they're not the same thing. Maya is the thing, the ultimate, the power because of which everything exists, including the power because of which karma exists. Karma is one of many laws and principles and realities in the empirical world, all of which exist because of the power of Maya. So they're absolutely not synonyms. However, we saw in our last class, we'll see today also, that Maya and Prakriti are sometimes synonyms. Notice I said sometimes. Sometimes Prakriti simply refers to Maya. You can look out the window And see, what did I just say? Sometimes Prakriti refers to nature. I misspoke, sorry. Just simply, and that's the simplest meaning of Prakriti, is nature. You look out the window, you see nature. But sometimes, and Sri Krishna uses the word Prakriti in both of these senses in this chapter. So Prakriti can mean nature. Prakriti can also mean the ultimate source of nature, which is Maya. Be ready for both meanings for that word Prakriti. The second question, several comments about my use of the word Akasha, space, in describing a metaphor in a prior verse. And we know that the ancient concept of Akasha, space, it was considered one of 5 elements. It was also considered to be absolutely empty. And of course, modern science says both of these are wrong. Akasha, space, is not an element. And in modern physics, space is not even empty. You can go and research that. You'll find out why scientists, modern physicists, think that space is not absolutely empty. So these are our modern concepts of space, but I took the word space in a very, very antiquated sense as an element and that which is perfectly empty. And several commentators want to say, well, if we reinterpret space like this, then it's more similar to our modern conception. That interpretation is problematic. And I think I referred to this, and that is, if you want to understand the metaphor used by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, you have to understand space as he understood it, not as we understand it in modern times. So to understand the teachings of Vedanta, when they use these metaphors, we have to look at the world from their perspective, not from our modern scientific perspective. There's a tendency some people have to want to reconcile what was taught in ancient times and what was taught in modern times with regard to science and the world. And the fact is, they're completely different. And your attempt to reconcile the ancient worldview with the modern scientific worldview ends up creating distortions and misunderstandings. So instead of reconciling them, we should simply understand that is how they understood the world in ancient times. It's not right or wrong. Well, from our modern standpoint, it's wrong. It is, however, how they understood the world, and if we understand their perspective, we can understand their use of these terms when they use in our scriptures, where we have drishtantas, metaphors, using those terms. Okay, enough. We can pick up the thread now. In the last verse we saw in the last class, describes from the lower of the 2 standpoints, just to remind us, our class today will be focused primarily on I call it lower of the 2 standpoints, but maybe lower and higher is not the best nomenclature to use. The empirical standpoint, as opposed to the absolute standpoint. For many students of Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, the absolute standpoint, Paramarthika Satta, is understood to be the highest perspective. And in Sanskrit, it's called the Parama. We speak of Parabrahma as the higher Brahman, and Apara Brahma or Saguna Brahman loosely as the lower Brahman. Not that they're higher and lower. One is absolute, one is empirical. Our discussion today is at the empirical level, talking about Saguna Brahman, talking about Ishwara, the creator, sustainer, destroyer. And in that context, we saw in verse 8, Sri Krishna says that he prakritim avashtabhya, wielding his power. It's here called prakriti, But here's Prakriti as a synonym for Maya. So he says, making use of Prakriti, depending on Prakriti, wielding Maya, like a magician wields the power of conjuring, Ishvara wields the power of Maya, and wielding that power of Maya, Sri Krishna says, I create the world again and again. Every cycle, when the world becomes unmanifest, Sri Krishna brings it into manifestation again, and then into a state of dissolution. Sri Krishna referring to himself in the first person here, not as Arjuna's charioteer, referring to himself as Ishvara. And then he continues from that same perspective in verse 9. That's where we pick up the thread. Na cha mam tani karmani, na cha mam tani karmani, na badhanti dhananjaya, na badhanti dhananjaya, udasina vadasinam, udasina vadasinam, asaktam teshu karmasu, asaktam teshu karmasu. In the second line, you see Arjuna addressed as Dhananjaya, literally conqueror of wealth. And that sounds a little obscure. In what sense is Arjuna the conqueror of wealth? In the Mahabharata, before the war took place, Yudhishthira did this Rajasuya yajna, a very elaborate ritual in which he had to send an army and an army that would conquer nearby kingdoms. That was part of the ritual, and I don't want to, the details are many and complex, we'll set the details aside, but Arjuna was in charge of those armies. And it was Arjuna with the mighty army that went and conquered the nearby lands and gained all their wealth, and that wealth and power then helped the Pandavas later when they went to war with the Kauravas. So because Arjuna was in the head of those armies which conquered the nearby kingdoms, he's referred to as Dhananjaya, conqueror of wealth. Little obscure. Okay, but here, Sri Krishna says, Tani karmani, those actions, those deeds. What deeds? Prior verse, he says, punah punaha visrajami. I create the world again and again. That's what he's referring to. In this verse, he says, Tani karmani. Those actions, creating the world again and again, na nibadnanti, connect those two words, they do not bind mam, me. Those deeds of creating the world again and again don't bind me, don't affect me. And this is a good reminder of the fact that Ishvara is not like a human being who has an agenda. So generally, when suppose you want to create something, Ishvara creates the world, suppose you want to create a piece of art or a piece of software. The same thing, you're creating. You can create a work of art, you can create some software program, you are the creator. As a creator, you have an agenda. You want the result, and you are driven by a desire. This is normal human behavior. We're driven by desire. We have an agenda to accomplish something, which is normal for a human being, but when we superimpose these human attributes on Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, we drag Ishvara down into the mud, so to speak. Ishvara is not a human being who is driven by desire. Ishvara doesn't have an agenda. He doesn't have you have a to-do list at home? Ishvara doesn't have a to-do list. We have to give up these rather naive ways of understanding Ishvara. What is the best way of understanding Ishvara in the context of creator, sustainer, destroyer? You've heard before the expression Ishvara is the karma phala data. The data, the giver of karma phala, the giver of the fruits of deeds. And one karma phala is that the universe should become manifest again. Another karma phala is that the universe should become unmanifest. We discussed at some length, starting in chapter 8, and I won't repeat all of that, that this cyclic universe in which we live, the cycles are driven by karma. And Ishvara is the intelligence behind the law of karma. It's a nice way of putting it. Ishvara is the source of the intelligence because of which the law of karma exists. So as that karma phala data, as the giver of the fruits of action, Ishvara brings the world into existence. Ishvara brings the world to its end, at the end of the cycle of universe, and without being driven by desire, without having an agenda, unlike a human being. And for that reason, Sri Krishna says in the third line that Ishvara udasinavat asinam. Ishvara asinam, he literally seated, don't take it literally, he remains. He remains what? Udasinavat, he remains detached. Detached means not having an agenda. When you create something, if you're creating a painting or a piece of software, you have an agenda. You want a good outcome. You want the painting to turn out very beautifully. You want your software to be free from bugs, right? Software bugs. So you have an agenda when you create something. Ishvara has no agenda. Udasinavat, he merely brings about the cycle of creation according to karmas. And he asaktam teshu karmasu, with regard to those karmas. What karmas? Creating the world again and again and again. With regard to Sri Krishna, with regard to the creation of cycle after cycle of the universe, Ishvara is asaktam, unattached. Attachment here means when you are attached to the outcome. You want a particular outcome. You are emotionally dependent. That's our definition of attachment. You are emotionally dependent on a particular outcome. You want the painting to come out nicely. You want the software to work properly. Ishvara is not like a human being with that kind of attachment or expectation. Okay, next. Mayadhyakshena prakritihi, mayadhyakshena prakritihi, suyate sacharacharam, suyate sacharacharam, hetunanena kaunteya, hetunanena kaunteya, jagat viparivartate, jagat viparivartate. Prakritihi suyate. Connect those two words, subject and verb. Subject, prakriti, nature. But nature here in the sense of Maya. Why do we say nature in a sense of Maya? He says, Maya adhyakshena, Maya, by me, adhyakshena, by me, the one who is in charge, the one who controls. So prakriti, nature, better translated here as Maya, Maya adhyakshena, under my control. So when we don't, to use that expression, Maya adhyakshena, makes it very clear. Ishvara is the one who controls Maya like a magician, uses his power of conjuring to create things, like to create the tree on the stage. Ishvara has this power of Maya through which he creates the entire universe. So Prakriti Suyate, the power of Maya under Ishvara's control, Suyate creates, literally gives birth to what? Sachara charam. Chara, that which moves. Achara, that which doesn't move. Is there a third category? That pretty much sums it up. So Sachara charam means everything. Everything that moves, everything that doesn't move means everything. Prakriti, the power of Maya, under Ishvara's control, creates all that exists. Ishvara is the one who possesses the power of Maya. Ishvara is the one who wields the power of Maya. And because Ishvara possesses and wields, those are gunas, qualities, which is why Ishvara is called Saguna Brahman in technical terms. The gunas are the quality of possessing Maya, the quality of wielding the power of Maya. These are gunas or attributes of Saguna Brahman of Ishvara. In the third line, Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, Hetuna anena, by that reason. By what reason? The first half of the verse. Through Ishvara wielding the power of Maya to bring the unmanifest universe into a state of manifestation and to bring the manifest universe into a state of unmanifestation. Because of that, Jagat viparivartate. Jagat, the world, viparivartate, in a loose sense, it goes on functioning. Literally, parivartate goes around. Now, it would be a mistake to say that the earth turns. Due to the power of Maya, the earth turns. Even though that's true in a manner of speaking, that's not what Sri Krishna means here. He's not talking about the turning of the world. He's talking about the cycle of creation. The universe goes through cycles of manifestation and dissolution because Ishvara wields the power of Maya to do so. Now, before we move on, some of you might be thinking, well, when did Ishvara create the world in the first place? Common question, right? If you've been attending those classes, you don't have that question, but suppose you do have that question. When did Ishvara create the world in the first place? And the question is, actually, you can't answer the question because the question is incorrect. The question is flawed. There's such a thing as an invalid question. For example, if I were to ask you, have you stopped beating your spouse yet? This is a typical American joke. Have you stopped beating your spouse yet? How will you answer that question? If you answer it yes or no, you're in trouble. And you can't answer that question because the question itself is flawed. The question is flawed because it has an incorrect assumption. The assumption that you are beating your spouse. A question that contains an incorrect assumption is an invalid question. The question, when did Ishvara create the universe for the first time, is an invalid question because it contains a wrong assumption. What is a wrong assumption? In the first place. Who said there was a first place? And this is where our minds get stretched to understand a beginningless cycle. There was no first creation. There have been an infinite number of prior universes. when you were studying math, do you remember being taught the number line? You go from 0 in a positive direction, you go from 0 in a negative direction, and at the end of the number line is an arrow pointing towards infinity. Where does that number line end? What is the biggest number? Any number you come up with, you can come up with a bigger number yet. That number plus 1 is bigger. That number plus another one is bigger yet. There's no end. There's no biggest number. That's our concept of infinity. There have been an infinite number of prior cycles of creation. Therefore, there was no first creation. The best way to put it then is Ishwara created the cycle of creation. He didn't create a first time, but Ishwara is the one because of whom the cycle of creation exists. And when does it exist? Oh, there's another good question. When did the cycle of creation come into existence? How's that one? It's a little different, right? Do you see the difference in that question? When did this, if Ishvara created the cycle of creation, when did he create the cycle of creation? So really kind of make our minds work more logically, and here's why. When? Time. Time is part of creation, is it not? In the absence of creation, there's no such thing as time. Even in our modern concept, the Big Bang went bang at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Afternoon is determined by the position of the sun and earth, right? So there was no sun, there was no earth, there was no time. When we're speaking of creation, we can't speak of time because when I say prior to creation, logically prior to creation, there was no such thing as time. You get it? Logic, not time-wise prior to creation, logically. Prior to creation, there was no such thing as time. Therefore, there was no time at which Ishvara created the cycle of creation. Good. You're getting now a really clear understanding. And just a quick comment here before we continue. This kind of clarity is so often missing in our process of spiritual growth. And the problem, the point I'd like to make is learning all these details won't make you enlightened. Absolutely not. This kind of detailed understanding will not make you enlightened, but it certainly will give you clarity and confidence as you proceed in your spiritual pursuit. So often we are in a spiritual pursuit in like a haze or fog. We've heard all these teachings, but they're very hazy, they're very foggy, and we're proceeding down the path in this fog. What we're doing now is clearing away some of this fog. So your travel down that path of spiritual growth is free from haziness or fog, but instead very clear. Everything should be crystal clear. Okay, next. Avajananti mam mudha, avajananti mam mudha, manushim tanum ashritam, manushim tanum ashritam, param bhavam ajananto, param bhavam ajananto, mama bhuta maheshwaram, Mama Bhuta Maheshwaram. Now Sri Krishna shifts from talking about himself as Ishvara, the creator of the universe. Now he is referring to the confusion about who is Sri Krishna. He continues to use the term me. using the pronoun aham, I, or here he uses the pronoun mam, me. When Sri Krishna says me, who is he referring to? Well, two different perspectives. One is him in a human form, mam manushim. Manushim means in a human form. So Sri Krishna is understood in a human form, but then he also refers to himself as Ishwara, creator, sustainer, destroyer, Saguna Brahman. And both are true from two different perspectives. We'll talk about those perspectives in just a few moments. But both are true, but most people don't understand that both are true. That's what he says here. He says, mudhaha. That aha, visarga dropped due to grammar rules. Mudhaha, those who are deluded, those who are ignorant. Those who are ignorant, avajananti. Literally, they despise mam, me. Me, manushim, in this human form. Me, who is tanum ashratam, the one who is ashratam, abiding in a tanu, in a body. So me, Sri Krishna says, abiding in this human form, the form of Sri Krishna that we know so well, abiding in this human form, he says many people, not just, he doesn't say they don't know me. Obviously they don't know him because they are mudha, they are ignorant, but he uses a stronger word. He says, avajananti, they disrespect me. They disregard me. That's a little weak word, but I think you get the idea. And this is to understand why he would use that word. They disrespect me, they disregard me. You need to know the whole story of the Mahabharata. There's an episode when the Pandavas and Kauravas were preparing for war. Sri Krishna was called upon several times to be a mediator, a negotiator, to try to negotiate a peaceful settlement, as we would say in modern times. And of course he failed, but he tried. One of the ways he tried to dissuade the Kauravas from fighting this war is Sri Krishna they were gathered in a palace, and Sri Krishna, the Kauravas and Pandavas, everyone was gathered in a palace, and Sri Krishna decided to give everyone a sneak preview of his Vishwarupa, his cosmic form. His Vishwarupa didn't occur just once in the Mahabharata. It happened several times. I forget. I think I counted once 4 or 5 times. I went through and researched that. So Vishwarupa his revelation of his cosmic form took place in a very powerful way in chapter 11, which we'll see shortly. But in addition to his revelation in chapter 11, he displayed his cosmic form in several other contexts, including in this context when he was trying to dissuade the Kauravas from fighting. So he just gave them a sneak preview of his powers, his cosmic form, and Duryodhana was unswayed by that revelation. Duryodhana thought that Sri Krishna was playing a cheap magic trick and just dismissed it. Didn't take it seriously at all. So look at this. Sri Krishna reveals his divinity. Duryodhana and others rejected that divinity. You have, with that context in mind, Sri Krishna says, mudhaha, the ignorant ones, avajananti, they disregard, they disrespect, mam, me, in this manushim tanum, in this human form, they disrespect me, param bhavam ajanantaha. Ajanantaha, because they don't know. Ajanantaha, they don't know. Mama param bhavam, my supreme nature. Mama param bhavam, my supreme nature. Ajanantaha, they do not know my supreme nature as being Bhuta Maheshwaram, Maha Ishwara Maheshwara. They don't know my true nature as being the great Lord of all creatures. Bhuta Maheshwaram, the great Lord of all creatures. Do you know, to understand the situation, it would be helpful to return to a metaphor we used, I think when we were studying chapter 7. I gave that lucid dream metaphor. Do you remember that metaphor? I'll remind you. You know what a lucid dream is. You're dreaming and you know you're dreaming. So the metaphor is this. Suppose what's happening right now is your lucid dream. You are dreaming, and I and everyone else in this room, we are all projections of you in your lucid dream. We are all created by you in your lucid dream. And you have projected yourself into your lucid dream in the form of the one who's sitting in your chair. So there are two aspects of you. One is the you sitting in your chair, and the other you is laying on your bed. These are two perspectives of you. So this is the same thing. You laying on your bed is here Sri Krishna's Param Bhavam, his higher form, his ultimate truth is represented as you laying in your bed. Then he refers to himself in the first half as having a manushim tanum, a human form, represented by you sitting in your chair. Two perspectives of you laying in your bed, sitting on your chair. Two perspectives of Sri Krishna, the creator, sustainer, destroyer of the universe, and Sri Krishna standing in Arjuna's chariot. So these two perspectives. Suppose, just to get the idea here, suppose this is remember our metaphor now? This is your lucid dream. We are all characters in your dream. You sitting in your chair are a projection of yourself. Suppose you choose to stand up and announce to all of us in the room that you are the creator of the world. That would be pretty interesting, wouldn't it? You stand up and inform us, hey, by the way, you see Swamiji up on stage? Yeah, I created him. You get it, right? You see the room in which we're sitting? Yes, I created that too. Look out through the window. You see the trees? Yes, I created that. I created everything. I sustain everything. And eventually, when I wake up, all of this will return to me. We hear you saying that. How would we respond? Depends. If we're like Duryodhana, we'll think, you're crazy. You're having some really bad delusion. You're in trouble. If we were like Duryodhana. But suppose we were more like Arjuna. And we understood. You are a manifestation of the dreamer. You standing up in this room, announcing to us all that this is your dream creation. If we had Shraddha, faith, like Arjuna, we would understand. You indeed are a projection of the dreamer manifest in this human world. Those who are mudha, like Duryodhana, would reject you as being under some kind of just having a strange delusion in your mind. But those among us who had faith, like Arjuna, we would understand. You are a manifestation of the creator, sustainer, destroyer. We use the term avatara. You would be understood by us as an avatara, as a descent of that dreamer into the dream world. That's a nice way of putting it. The dreamer descends into the dream world as one of the dream characters, just as Ishwara descends, so to speak, into this human world as an avatara. Okay, good. Next. Moghasha mogha karmano, moghasha mogha karmano, mogha jnana vichetasaha, mogha jnana vichetasaha, rakshasim asurim chaiva, rakshasim asurim chaiva, prakritam mohanim shritaha, prakritam mohinim shritaha. Previous verse, he used the term mudha. Mudha, one who is ignorant. And now he is talking about those who are ignorant. He is giving you some further insight into the nature of those ignorant ones who disregard Sri Krishna. He says they are mogha ashaha. Their asha, their dreams and hopes and desires are mogha, fruitless, useless. They are mogha karmanaha. Their actions, their deeds, their efforts in worldly life are mogha, useless. Literally fruitless, but useless. Now, why is Sri Krishna coming to this conclusion so quickly? He is broadening the topic a little bit here. Prior verse, he's talking about those who fail to recognize him as an avatara, as a manifestation of God. But now in this verse, he broadens out that ignorance. So to Sri Krishna, they're not only ignorant of his divinity, they're ignorant even of the existence of Ishwara. Ignorant of the existence of Ishwara is like go back to the lucid dream. Suppose you have not yet stood up and told us you are the dreamer. We are part of your lucid dream, and we don't know that this is your lucid dream. We don't know that this is a dream. We don't know that this creation in which we live has a creator. Imagine, we are all inside your lucid dream, but we don't know we are inside your lucid dream. We don't know there is a dreamer responsible for this dream world. We're talking about, that's a metaphor to represent those who don't know Ishvara as creator, sustainer, destroyer. A great number of people look upon the world in a very mechanical way. The world began with the Big Bang. The world exploded according to the laws of nature, and we live today according to the laws of nature. So those with a scientific perspective will argue, when science can explain everything, then why do we need to posit the existence of Ishvara, the existence of God? This is an important topic in modern times, because many people feel that in today's modern or even postmodern scientific era, it's kind of quaint to speak of Ishvara, to speak of God. And in fact, I'll tell you one thing I think one thing many of us have seen, especially in India, is to be religious has become old-fashioned. right? You get the idea? Oh, it's so old-fashioned. Now in this modern scientific era, what's the point of religion? What's the point of God, Ishwara, all of this stuff? That all belongs to a prior generation, a prior era. It's quaint, it's old-fashioned, it's meaningless and irrelevant in modern times. Not. Not at all. And it's not hard. Here's the problem. Let me give you the kind of the essence of what we're going to discuss in this verse, and we'll talk about it first, and then we'll see the verse very easily. Here's the problem. Those who say, according to modern science, God doesn't exist, they dismiss in their minds, using logic and science and reasoning, they dismiss not the Ishvara that we understand, they dismiss a God of their own imagination. So they imagine, those who dismiss the existence of God, if you ask them who is God, and they'll say, an all-powerful, all-knowing being out there in the heavens who creates the world out of nothing. Basically the biblical view of God. A God who is an all-powerful, all-knowing being, meaning just like a human being, but with more power and more knowledge. A human being times 1 million, or 100 million, or billion, whatever. But a vastly expanded vision of the power, human powers on steroids, so to speak, to use some modern terminology. So a human-like being who has all power and who is omniscient, has all knowledge, and who creates the universe out of nothing, I also reject that God. If you tell me that God doesn't exist, I agree. That God is a fiction of your imagination. That God is a fictitious concept that has some roots, and perhaps it has some roots in Western religion, but that God doesn't exist, I agree completely. But that's not the God we're talking about in the Bhagavad Gita. The God we're talking about in the Bhagavad Gita is not a human being, is not out there in some heavenly domain, and did not create the universe out of nothing. All of these are silly concepts, naive concepts from our perspective. What we find, here's a perspective I find very significant. What we find in the ancient Hindu tradition, in the teachings of the ancient rishis, is a very sophisticated theology. Theology is a study of God. So in the Western culture, theology tends to be more simplistic. There's God, there's you, God created you. Bas, ho gaya. That's my simplistic theology. And of course, there's more to it than that, but compared to the theology of the ancient rishis, it's very simplistic. We have in the teachings of the ancient rishis very sophisticated ways of understanding the creator, sustainer, destroyer. And we won't go further into that. That's a topic that actually we talked about back in chapter 7. If you want to review that, go back to chapter 7. We went through this in some detail. The sophistication, when we considered monotheism, we dismissed it. We considered polytheism, we dismissed it. We considered pantheism, we dismissed it. We had this discussion, I think, back in chapter 7. You can go back and review. What we have here is a very sophisticated theology, which, because of its sophistication and because it doesn't come from Western culture, it's largely unknown. Those modern scientific people who reject God do so without understanding this sophisticated understanding of Ishvara as presented by the rishis of ancient India. They don't understand it. And my personal feeling is if a modern scientific person could understand Ishvara like the ancient rishis understood Ishvara, they would easily accept that Ishvara. And I'm a good example of such a person. You know my background. I was raised in a Christian tradition. I became completely irreligious as a young man. And then when I came to these teachings, and especially when I came to hear Puja Swami Tadatmananda explain, with my scientific orientation, my mind was opened, in a manner of speaking, to understand. And accept is a wrong word, because accept means blind faith, generally, the word accept. Do you accept the existence of God means do you believe? Do you have blind faith in God? I'll tell you flat out, I don't believe. I don't believe. Difference between belief and knowledge. The ancient rishis presented, you've heard me say this before, Ishvara is not a matter of faith as presented by the ancient rishis. Ishvara is a matter of knowledge. Ishvara is a reality to be understood. Yes, we begin with faith. Absolutely, we begin with faith. I don't mean to put faith down. Faith is crucial, as we saw back in chapter 4. Shraddhavan labhate jnanam. One who has faith gains knowledge. We begin with faith. Faith is important, but it's a stepping stone. Faith in God is a stepping stone to knowledge of Ishvara. So here, those who reject Ishvara are rejecting not the Ishvara of the Bhagavad Gita, they are rejecting the God of their imagination. And let them reject. But we can only hope that their minds one day are opened, as my mind was, to understand Ishvara in this more sophisticated manner. Now, back to the verse. Sri Krishna is talking about those who are mudha, ignorant, not just ignorant of his divinity as an avatara, they're ignorant of Ishvara. They reject the existence of Ishvara. They reject the idea of a creator, sustainer, etc. for the universe. And they, along with that, they reject scriptures, all scriptures of every religion. And along with rejecting scriptures, they reject dharma. Everything goes out the window. They reject everything. They reject religion. They reject spirituality. They just what do they say? The baby goes out with the bathwater out the window. It's all gone. What are the consequences? And Sri Krishna speaks of the consequences of this blanket rejection of religion and spirituality. These are the consequences. You become moghasha. Your hopes and dreams for a good life are fruitless. Because when you reject everything, you become subject to your mind being pulled down into adharmic behavior. We have to kind of add this to the verse to understand the current context. When you reject all forms of religion and spirituality, there's not very much to support a life of dharma. Now, someone who has no religion or spirituality, they can be dharmic. Absolutely true. To live a dharmic life doesn't depend on being religious or even on being spiritual. On the other hand, it's far easier to live a dharmic life if you are religious and have a spiritual path. Do you see the point I'm making? It is not true to say that to live a dharmic life depends entirely on religion and spirituality. I think that's a false statement. There's such a thing as humanism, and which is valid. You can find plenty of non-religious and non-spiritual reasons to be dharmic, to be righteous. On the other hand, those who have no religion or spiritual practice whatsoever in their lives, I think it would be a fair statement to say it's more likely for them to fall from the path of dharma and engage in hurtful, immoral, illegal, wrong, harmful behaviors. Not necessarily so, but more likely that they would fall from the path of dharma. With that in mind, Sri Krishna says here that those who have rejected religion and spirituality, they are moghasha. Their hopes for a good life are destroyed because they can fall from the path of dharma. And once you're engaged in hurtful, wrong activities, there's a modern term, they call it blowback. Blowback means you suffer the consequences of your wrong behavior. One way or another, it comes back on you. Blowback. You suffer the consequences. They become moga karmanaha. Their efforts in life become futile, useless. Why? Again, falling from the path of dharma. Once you give up dharma, once you resort to immoral and illegal means of fulfilling your desires, sooner or later you suffer the consequences of that. That's Sri Krishna's point here. And these people are also mogha jnanaha. Their jnana, their understanding is mogha, useless. Useless in what sense? This is very interesting. God gave us these powerful minds, and when you consider the intelligence of a human being compared to every other living thing, compare your intelligence to anything, to the intelligence of a little creature or a big creature. Among creatures we find in maybe in primates, chimps, chimpanzees, and apes are relatively intelligent. Dolphins, we think, are fairly intelligent. Maybe there's even some evidence for some kinds of birds have certain kinds of intelligence. So we find intelligence among animals, but which animal can ask the question, does God exist? Or, where did I come from? As intelligent as an ape or chimpanzee or dolphin might be, they don't have that intelligence. We have that intelligence to look up into the dark sky at night, see all those stars, and say, where in the world did all this come from? And here's the point that Sri Krishna is making here, and you'll see it very strongly in the second half. We have to get to the second half of this verse. But he's going to say, if you fail to use this powerful intelligence to ask these questions, you're no better than an animal. He's going to use stronger language at the end. We'll come back to that. So here, mogha jnana. If you fail to ask these questions, your intelligence is useless. You're not using it in the highest manner possible. Such people are vichetasaha, almost a synonym. They are without intellectual capacity, literally, vichetas, without intellectual capacity. They are failing to use their minds to ask those big questions. Where did I come from? Who is the source? Who and what is the source for all that exists? And Sri Krishna, here comes the harsh language now. He says that such people, look at the last line, end. They are shritaha. They are based, their thinking is based in what? Mohinim prakritim. Their natures are based in prakriti, nature. And here prakriti doesn't mean Maya. This is a second way of using prakriti in a very simple sense of nature. Their natures are mohinim, deluded. They are established in these deluded natures, which are rakshasim. What language he uses? Rakshasim, asurim. He doesn't call them like animals. Worse, demonic. Rakshasas and asuras are two kinds of demons in the Hindu mythology. So in modern times, we can say they are like animals. Sri Krishna says they are like demons. To fail to use our God-given intelligence, to fail to use that intelligence to ask the big questions. Where did I come from? Where did the world come from? Who and what is the source for all that exists? To fail to use our minds in this way reduces us to the level of animals, or in Sri Krishna's words, it reduces us to the level of rakshasas and asuras, to the level of demons. Okay, that's a good place to conclude for today. I have an important announcement before we finish. You know that we rely on volunteers here to get everything done in the ashram. We've managed so far not to have a paid staff, and that allows us to keep our expenses down. That's allowed us to continue functioning through this pandemic. Even when we were closed down for so many months, we were able to continue functioning because we don't have a paid staff and our expenses are modest. Well, one of the ways that we manage to avoid paid staff is we use volunteers to do our bookkeeping. And we need volunteers now to do a specific administrative task, and that is taking care of our deposits, which means taking checks and depositing them in the bank, taking those checks, entering the information into a computer, making the deposit. It's just normal kinds of business activities. We need 2 volunteers to help us with this work. Obviously, volunteers would need to have some computer skills, ability to interact with banks and businesses, etc. It's not a huge job. Once a month, you would be involved in doing a deposit. A deposit would require maybe a couple of hours of work that you can do at home, and several hours that you'll do at the ashram. So some of it can be done at home, some of it can be done at the ashram. So I would request, we need 2 volunteers. I request who amongst you are able to carry out this work. Obviously, it has to be a local person, since some of the work has to be done here at the ashram. Please send me an email and volunteer. That way we can avoid hiring staff, and we can keep our costs down. Very good. Okay, we'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Shranvan Uttabasira Sadhanam. Om Mahaganapataye Namaha. Ishwaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha. Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.